probably tell, things are looking a little different. Well, I don't even know if we started yet. All right, let's try again. Good morning, 8th grade. As you could tell, things are looking a little different. I've got a new software. The one I used, they started charging for to use videos over 5 minutes. This one does also, but it's only $30 a year. So Pony, you don't care. Anyway, let's go. Chapter 4, Section 1. Let's get started. Keep it, 8th graders, the ones of you that turn these in, you did a really good job with these mostly. But keep in mind, you will be turning these in the week before Christmas break. You need to write these down. All right, you don't just give the notes that I type, don't just print them off and give them back to me. That doesn't really do anything at all. So anyway, everything's backwards. It's a mirror image. It's really weird, this new software. But anyway, we'll do our best and see if I can get this uploaded to YouTube. If you're seeing this, obviously succeeded. If not, who knows? We'll just send you the notes. But you do need to write these down. You do need to keep your notebook in order. You need to keep legible, organized, label. We always say LOL. So your first section should be Chapter 4, Section 1, and so on. Those of you that brought your notebooks in, I've got that stack here. I don't know if that applies to any of you that are hearing this, but if it is, I will have them down in the lobby. Today's Tuesday, after school between 2:45 and 5:30. I don't remember the time, but whatever the pickup time is, make sure that you answer the attendance question for the day, which I'll ask at some random point in the video when I figure out what I'm going to ask. So we did Reconstruction, and today we're talking about the what you would call what we would consider in old westerns. You've seen a lot of movies and TV shows, or maybe not seen them, but at least know of them, that you would call westerns. And the era of the western is basically what we're going to start talking about. This is the expansion of the United States on the other side, the west side of the Mississippi River, all the way to California. And so when you think of there's a lot of old stereotypes and a lot of old, like I said, TV shows, movies, and some that maybe you watch, some that are probably not appropriate for you to watch. But when they walk into the saloon with the doors that swing in and out, and they're always wearing spurs, and they always have hats, and they're always ordered from a bar where the bottles just have like X's on the back, and they are playing poker and shooting at each other, and then they've got those big floppy hats, and they got pickaxes, and they're mining for gold and all that stuff. That's basically the period of time in the area of the country that we're going to be talking about. And a lot of this went on before and after the Civil War, so we're not really moving on in time. We're talking really pretty much about the same period of time, just a different subject. And so we talked about Reconstruction that stretched into 1900 or the 1900s. But now, obviously, as you can see on the slide here, we're going back in time a little bit. But the gold rush, newspapers told people, truly or not, that people were making $20 a day making gold. Now, were there people making $20 a day? Probably. Just like the lottery, somebody wins, not every time, but eventually, the jackpot grows if nobody does. But eventually you got like, hey, that guy or that girl is the lottery winner. But the problem is, trying to make winning the lottery your job, the odds of that are not very high. And it was the same for these gold and silver boomtowns. The idea that you're going to go out west with a pan to swish around in the stream or pickaxe to dig into the rock and pull out a softball-sized hunk of gold and be rich forever is not very realistic. Did it ever happen? Sure. Not the softball size, but enough to make you rich. Softball-sized piece of gold would be insane. But anyway, and so the idea that we're going to find all this gold just laying around on the ground or in in riverbeds, which is where they would find most of what they found. They would, you've seen these before. You've probably done this, like, they have this stuff at like pumpkin patches and stuff where you get a bunch of rocks from the bottom of the creek bed, and you've got the little pan that's got the bottom that can sluice through. And then you find gold, or you find usually pyrite, which is, coal with what they call fool's gold. Basically, not really coal, but a useless rock. More useless than coal, in fact, because coal can at least be burned for light and energy. And so, but the problem here is that, there's not really that much gold all told. You can Google this, and the exact veracity or truth, and how, whether it's 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 or whatever, is up for debate. But basically, all the gold ever harvested on Earth could fit into 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And so it's really not that much. And so, which is one reason why it's so valuable. Another reason now in 2020 is that there's really one company that hoards all of it, which is another thing altogether. But the problem is for these people is that most of the gold, as you can see here, is all in underground mines. Most of it, not all of it. And so mining companies can get to those, not me, not you, not just a random dude is going to be able to harvest the gold at that level. Okay, and so you have to extract to remove something. You've probably heard the word extraction when it comes to a dentist talking about a tooth, a wisdom tooth. You've probably watched videos on YouTube of somebody who've had their wisdom teeth extracted and have they're still on the drugs they give them to knock them out. And so most people, you had a better chance of succeeding if you joined a mining company. But that's the whole problem. Most of these people left to go west specifically because they were sick of like working a 9-to-5 job. And so the idea that you were going to go out and strike it rich on your own was what the really romantic pull of this whole idea was. I'm going to go out there, I'm going to be my own man, and it was usually men, almost exclusively, and I'm going to find gold and I'm going to make it on my own. That's fine. But what really happened is they usually had to, in order to be able to get any of the gold, join these mining companies, and you were really just back to being an employee anyway. The biggest lode was a silver lode. A lode is just a streak or a collection of a whatever you want to call it, a vein of precious metal in underground rock, whether that is gold. In this case, the Comstock Lode is silver, of course, as you can see there. Zinc, copper, other things that were valuable. It wasn't always just gold. But this one, again, the idea that they were going to find this big windfall of just precious metals, it happened. But it didn't happen for the individuals that went out there. It happened for the big corporation, the big company, the company that sprung up to be able to get the ore out of the rock. And so again, you have a situation where the idea is that people are going to go out and make their own money, but the reality is that the company ends up making the money and the people end up just doing the work. So the Comstock Lode was named after Henry Comstock, who was one of the guys that owns the claim the gold was found. And so whenever you would have a discovery, there would be a small town that would immediately spring up around, and so they would have bars a lot. And again, this is the old Western, the saloon with the swinging doors, the people fighting in the bars. And the reality is, listen, a lot of you, and I myself, but a lot of you that are hearing this, and there aren't many of you left, but those of you that are, a lot of you are males. And I'm not going to get into a gender war, but we don't always make good decisions, especially in large groups. If you're ever at a slumber party, back in the old days when we used to be able to visit each other, like on a Saturday night, you're having a sleepover with like 5 different 7th, 8th grade, sophomore in high school, college boys. They're like, hey guys, you guys want to study some algebra? Like, that's not what happens. They're usually doing something they probably shouldn't. But my example I always give is like helmets exist. That's an example of like what happens when men in groups run things for the longest time. Helmets exist because men were doing things that were turning their brains to pudding, and they were basically left with two options. Like, hey, option one, stop. Option two, build a box to go on your head so you can keep. We chose number two. So these were, the saying is the Wild West. These were wild. People getting shot, people in fights in bars over poker games. Wild Bill Hickok, most famously, he would play poker in all hours of the night. He got shot in the back by somebody who'd beaten the poker hand the night before, named Jack McCall. He had a pair of aces and a pair of eights. That's now known as the dead man's hand in poker. And so, like, these were like 90% men, and then the women that were there were usually, there were a lot of, in the book it says entertainers, but they were working in brothels, and so it was basically just chaos. And so, like, there was no like elected government, and like the people who were in charge, they were just saying like, hey, that guy's, you can be sheriff, and like, all right, well, that doesn't really qualify you to be in charge of anything. And so these places were pretty much chaos. And then the other stereotype you get of the West are these ghost towns where you walk into this town and it's abandoned, and they always look down the mains and you see the saloons on the side with nobody in them. They always have a tumbleweed that goes across. Those are called ghost towns. Ghost towns, I mean, we live in an area right now where a lot of people are moving out, sadly, because the coal mines have really, they haven't, they've been, a lot of them have been mechanized to a point where employees get laid off. And that, my family was a mining family and they got hit hard. My, grandfather, when he was alive. But we're not a ghost town. A ghost town means like population zero. Usually in a movie, you'll have like one crazy old man going, sitting on a porch in a rocking chair. But, in reality, that's not really the case. And so, once you would have all these empty buildings, sometimes like Deadwood, South Dakota, they turn them in like museums and casinos there now and stuff you can visit. So we have new states, North Dakota, South Dakota. They split the Dakotas so they can get more representation. The Republicans could get more representation in Congress, so they can get 4 senators instead of 2. Keep that in mind now as you watch the news and they're arguing because they're like, Democrats want, Washington, D.C. to be a state and Puerto Rico to be a state. And like, well, they're paying taxes. When we, in 1776, taxation without no taxation without representation was one of the big things. So, I don't really have a strong feeling one way or the other, but it seems like if you're going to pay taxes, maybe you should be represented in Congress. Washington, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Washington aside, these other 2, 3, 4, 5 states are really some of the most sparsely populated states in America. They're really, I've never been, but allegedly incredibly scenic and beautiful. But a couple of these states, I want to say Montana off the top of my head, they have no numerical speed limit. Like basically there's just like, hey, if nobody's around and you're just driving down the road, you can basically go as fast. Like if you're weaving in and out of traffic, you can get busted for speeding. But if you're just a flat straight highway, there's nobody around for miles, and you're going 100, they don't really care. Today's question. What is your guess? I think the random number game, I haven't checked because that was like 2 weeks ago. It was either 37 or 44. I did one for 7th grade, one for 8th grade. How many fluid ounces of coffee do I average drinking every morning? What's your guess? Okay, I'll give you a hint. It's more than one. So we want a transcontinental railroad. Trans means across. So a railroad that connects east to west. Most of the big cities are in the east, but we're now getting like, and we'll talk about it in the next section, like ranches and, beef, cows in the west, and we need to be able to connect one to the other. And so the North and the South argued over like where the route should be. Obviously, each side wanted, the railroad to pass through their area, but they also were arguing over slavery. They fought a civil war in the middle of this. And so when the southern states were like, hey, deuces, we're leaving, the northern states just voted while they were out. I'm like, okay, this is where we're making the route. And so it took a while because they stopped. during the Civil War, which makes a lot of sense. You can't be like, hey, stop shooting. We're trying to build a railroad here. But anyway, it connected the Atlantic to the Pacific. Basically, the Union Pacific started in Nebraska and worked towards the west. Central Pacific started in Sacramento and worked east, and they got paid by the mile. The Central Pacific really got the short end of the stick because they had to go over, around, or through the Sierra Nevada mountains. And so basically, they did about half the mileage as the other company because the other company was going across flat plains for most of the time. So they got the short end of the stick when it came to getting paid by the mile. And so by 1883, there are several transcontinental rail lines. The steel industry, lumber industry, and a bunch of other industries spring up. Order by mail becomes a thing. The Sears Roebuck catalog became very popular. And we had to invent time zones. Fun fact about trains, if you have two on the same track at the same time, that's not good. Trains back then, especially, the boilers were insanely explosive. In fact, you can find on YouTube a video of like a one state's fair back in like the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. I don't remember the exact year. They set it up as like, we're going to ram these two trains together. And they did it. And they didn't get near like far back enough because the explosion was way bigger than they realized. And whoopsie poopsie, they killed a few people there. Time zones, of course. So if you are east, like it's, I don't know, 8:30 or so here. In the east, it's 9:30. In the Colorado Rockies, it's 7:30. In California, it's 6:30. And then even Alaska and Hawaii, you get even further away. They're even an hour earlier. And so we've got time zones now. Okay, so don't forget to answer your attendance question. Hopefully this works. I'm using Screencastify set of Loom, and I don't really know all the controls down there at the bottom, what they're going to do when I click them. So we'll find out if this works here in a minute. But have a good day. Make sure you keep wearing your mask and all that good stuff. And I'll see you later.